Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wisdom Seeker Live. Glad to be back with you. It has been a couple of weeks as a result of my recent travel, and I am glad to be back. I missed everyone, and I look forward to some great discussion engagement today. If you would, be sure and uh, tell us where you're joining from so that we can know where our audience is. And I appreciate all of you being here and look forward to the next hour of some hopefully great discussion and engagement over the topic of where has the wisdom gone. We always like to start off with talking about how we see wisdom, and uh, the wisdom we see as a journey beginning with knowledge and picking up facts and figures and information along the way, both intentionally and unintentionally. And then the next step in this journey is to gain understanding. And our understanding we gain through experience, through doing something with the knowledge that we have gained, applying it, hopefully using it well. And then the last step in the journey is to go from uh, knowledge and understanding to wisdom. And wisdom is being able to see things from a much bigger picture, seeing things outside of ourselves, seeing things beyond just what it means to us and how it affects us directly, but also to those around us. And so we hopefully take that next step. And for those of a spiritual bent, we like to think of wisdom as seeing things through God's eyes. So that's the context of wisdom as we see it on Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. And so want to welcome a number of folks. Nazia, welcome. Rosemary, good to see you. Kingsley, glad to have you. Arfine, welcome. Sharon, good morning. Glad to see all of you today, and I look forward to having some great discussion and, most of all, seeking wisdom as a result of our time together so that we can help each other along the way. And that is a part of what wisdom is about to start with. And so um, I am more and more concerned that we are seeing a diminishing of wisdom in our world. Wisdom is something that should be a priority and it should be sought. And I'm concerned that it has become less of a priority. And in some cases, there, I believe, are people that don't see the value in wisdom at all. And the problem with that is that it affects many things. One is, in my opinion, is the we call common sense, and I believe it is a byproduct of having wisdom. It is the ability to, again, make choices beyond the moment, make choices beyond just the immediate result as of that time and just as it involves us only. And therefore, we begin to look at things and make those better choices. And we quite often call that common sense. And we pretty readily say anymore that common sense isn't so common anymore. And I think that's a direct result of a lack of priority to seek and gain wisdom. And I think that part of the problem with this is that we have tried to substitute something for wisdom, and that is intellectualism. In other words, there was a time in our history, if you go back and look at our history, you will see that we even had a slogan that we were going to be a knowledge-based society. And there is a truth, an element of truth there, that we must have knowledge. But when this occurred, knowledge became the king. It was even touted that knowledge gave us power. And again, I can appreciate some of the nuances. The problem is that it brought us to focus just on attaining knowledge and getting more and more knowledge as we went along. Welcome, Mary. Glad to have you here with us. So, intellectualism and a focus strictly on knowledge. Knowledge is just the beginning. And when we consider knowledge only, and that becomes our focus, we lack the character that goes with what happens when we gain understanding, the experience that we deal with. And as a result, we have people that have even become elite in their knowledge. They think that because they can present knowledge and fashion it in certain ways to make arguments and so on, that they are somehow superior to those that have less knowledge or that are less focused on their knowledge. So that is a part of the problem that we're encountering. And what I would like to hear from the audience is, do you see a diminishing of wisdom in our culture, in our society? Is it just me? I really do think, though, that it's going on. And what happens is that the choices that people make that become unwise may be technically correct and may be legal. Some would argue that they're moral, but are they wise? And I think there is a difference between them. Good morning or a good day, Dr. Vimla. I know in India it's actually going into the evening. Thank you for being here. So wisdom, is it diminishing? Is it going away? Do we have people that lack wisdom in their approach in what they're doing? And I believe we are seeing that. And I believe it's also a result of this almost protectionism, in that we have gotten to a point that we guard our children from any adversity and that we keep them from struggling with life. And part of what builds wisdom into our life is that struggle, is the opportunity to work through and find out and test our knowledge and apply it in situations and circumstances, and learn to realize that knowledge is helpful, but how we use it is more important. And so we've just really got to back up culturally and consider, are we seeking to gain wisdom? And are we helping our young people, our children at a young age, to not only gain knowledge, which again, nothing wrong with gaining knowledge, but that's not the stopping place. And even gaining understanding through experience is not the end of the result that we're looking for. And yet that's what we have done to our culture, to our children in particular. We don't allow them to deal with challenges. We don't allow them to have to face those challenges and therefore work through the issues involved. And as a result of that, there is a lack of character among our young people, lack of ability to endure through challenges and hard times. And we're into probably our third generation of this. And the result is showing in that as we have situations in our life and our world that are challenging, that people aren't able to walk through it, to overcome it. Rosemary has a comment. Says, sadly, I think that far too many people are now fearful to speak wisdoms that once were commonplace simply because others will speak them down or claim that old-fashioned wisdom has no place anymore. And unfortunately, I have to agree with you, Rosemary, that speaking of wisdom and challenging what is going on based on wisdom is something that is no longer considered valuable or viable. There are people that have reframed our conversations in such a way that what they've basically said is that the only valid way to have discussions, to carry on decision making, is through intellectual pursuit alone. And again, I want to say knowledge is valuable in that it is the beginning of the journey into wisdom. But if we stop there, we have some real problems that we face as a result. Welcome, Zaid and Maud. Glad to have you with us. So we're discussing, where has the wisdom gone? Or even, has it gone away? I believe it has. Not completely. There are some people that are gaining wisdom. And what's really interesting is that normally wisdom is considered a product of age. And that is of some logical sense, because hopefully as we get older, we are paying closer attention, we're more observant, and we're making an effort to gain that wisdom, take that next step. But that is not the only way that wisdom is gained. In fact, it is not the primary way. The primary way that we gain wisdom is through our struggles and through testing of our knowledge and testing our understanding with life. And that is what we continue to do, everything that we can to avoid those experiences. And that is unhealthy for us. And as a culture, it has cost us. And the result is that we see common sense missing. And we see choices made, and we go, okay, they may be legally correct, and they could even, one could argue that they're morally correct, but are they wise? And so we really need to back up and revisit the idea of wisdom. And wisdom, by the way, is something that we can stumble onto just by being alive and taking steps and making choices. The question becomes, are we as a culture seeking the wisdom? And that's where I believe part of our problem is. We are no longer seeking wisdom in our daily lives. We are seeking all kinds of knowledge, and we're seeking even some experiences, as long as they're not unpleasant. And the problem is that it is the hard or unpleasant experiences that help us gain the deepest understanding, and also sets us up to move to a place of wisdom based on what we know and what we observe. And so I really hope that if we continue to seek together to change that, to really encourage a culture of gaining wisdom. I know for some of us, the opportunity with our children is limited because they are adults themselves. And so now they're having to work those things out for themselves. But we still have an opportunity as grandparents to influence our grandchildren with wisdom. I would even suggest that maybe part of what our big goal should be as grandparents is not so much to seek to spoil the children. I know we claim that as a right somehow, that we've dealt with our children for many years, and now it's our chance to have some of the fun, if you will, by spoiling our grandchildren. I have to even challenge that common notion and expectation in that we, as older adults, as grandparents, hopefully have wisdom to offer our grandchildren. And a better thing to do, in my estimation, and I know I may be peculiar in this, and I'm okay with that, but in my estimation, that should be more of our focus than this thing of spoiling the grandchildren. And I understand being able to do some extra things and spend extra time or maybe extra money to be able to make something special for the grandchildren. But I'm not talking about an occasional effort to make it fun and so on. But what I'm talking about is a pattern of so fixated on spoiling the grandchildren that we are not giving them the wisdom that we have gained by the time that we take with them and begin to share with them out of our life. Let's see. Said has a comment. Says we're seeking as many certificates as possible, even without experience, seeking managerial leadership positions just for the simple fact of one has a master degree or few certificates. Yes, the attainment, academic attainment has become king in our world. And the idea that if we have enough letters after our name, enough degrees, enough certificates, and the like, that somehow that's going to give us power and that it's going to determine our well-being even. And I would argue that those things are part of the process, no doubt. But if they become our sole focus in what we're doing, then we're missing out on finding the wisdom we need to deal with more things, to be able to walk through more issues and overcome adversities. So I really pray that we make it a choice to truly make the effort to seek out wisdom in our lives and to encourage our families, our young people to do the same. Go beyond just gaining that certificate or that next accolade, but rather help them but see the value of finding wisdom in everyday life, wisdom in what we do, the choices that we make. And with doing so, we then give our world a better chance of going in a good direction rather than a negative direction. Another factor, I believe, in loss of wisdom as a culture is our dependence on other people's opinions and other people feeding us information. And the primary place that we see that happening is through media, news media, and the pop media, but also on some level social media. The fact that on social media we will get together and gather so-called wisdom, or we will collectively make a decision about things that we think are best, and that includes making decisions about future of our children and how the best way to go about it. And the problem is that going with collective thought only can be a problem. Now, please understand, not saying that we should always go against the flow or ignore the crowd, so to speak. But if our functioning and our decision-making processes and our efforts to seek wisdom is only driven by the group thought, the trends, whatever, then we have created an issue for ourselves, and the result is what we're seeing currently. Welcome, Jack. Glad to have you with us. Jack makes a comment. He says, discernment in circumstances as well as obedience of our values are the traits that lead to a wisdom. It is indeed that we have to have those sets of values and adhere to them, whatever they are. And when we start using those and applying those, then we also gain discernment. Discernment is another byproduct of seeking wisdom. And in my mind, when I think discernment, I think about being able to look at things and considering them not just intellectually, not just knowledge based, but beyond that, and even ability to use what will, emotional quotient as part of that decision making, so that we're using not just an intellectual approach, but an approach that involves our total being. Our not just our thoughts, but our emotions, as well as, and this is a factor that has to be considered, is the spiritual aspect. I believe to truly gain wisdom to the fullest extent, it is necessary to have a strong spiritual basis in our life. And how you go about it, that varies from person to person. I have my approach and thoughts on it. Happy to share it anytime with anyone that asks. But the fact that we are addressing the third part of our being and bringing that into, excuse me, our consideration as we go forward helps us in approaching things wisely versus just intellectually. Zaid has a comment. Once I was asking someone, new operations manager, about the wisdom of why she is seeking a second master degree in business. Her answer, in short, was, I might need it if I want to work at another company. Just sharing one of my experiences. Yes, it has become the even our savior, lack of better terms, our advantage, if you will, by continuing to gain more knowledge alone. And that's why we see people now that seek multiple degrees. be, because part of what we have valued as a culture is the academic, the intellectual pursuit as being more valuable, more important than seeking and gaining wisdom. And your example is one well taken, Zaid, in that we spend so much money, time, and effort seeking intellectualism rather than taking what we already know and can build on, by the way, because I think it's important, and something I choose to do is every day I choose to learn something new, pick up some new knowledge, or take some of the knowledge that I already have and use it in a different fashion, and so on. But this idea of going and getting more intellectual in order to be successful is part of where our culture's at. And I believe it is part of the reason that wisdom is diminishing in our culture. And I think the result of the diminishment of wisdom is we see a lack of common sense, we see a lack of discernment, and we see even a lack of maturing on the part of a lot of people. They are stuck in their emotional and emotional intelligence and level is even stuck as an adolescent or as a youngster. And so the problem with not seeking wisdom is that it affects how we filter and process things. Rosemary has a comment. I find it odd that people chase certificates that no one actually wants to see, nor does the certificates provide knowing life experience, which provides a better basis to grow from. And so I agree with you, Rosemary, that the same effort that we put into more intellectual attainment, if it was that same effort was put into seeking out and finding the wisdom in what's going on with us and in our experiences, then we're in a far better place at that point. And that we then are making better choices rather than continuing and perpetually making unwise choices. And we see this going on so often. We look at things and behaviors both individually and culturally, and just I don't know about you all, but at times I'm completely baffled, completely mystified that people are making those choices and they are living in that fashion because I look at it and I think, wow, it is, to put it in an old-fashioned word, I see a lot of foolishness. And that is something that as a culture, we cannot sustain our culture if we continue in that fashion. There's a point where the deterioration of the wisdom and the resulting benefit of gaining that wisdom will so impact us that we can have the greatest wisdom in the world and still not be able to get through and move forward with the challenges in life. So again, the result of lack of wisdom as a culture, we're seeing the results of it. We're seeing the consequences. We're seeing the symptoms of it all around us. And yet, rather than making it a priority to say, okay, well, there is a lack of wisdom in our culture, so we need to do something about it, we can't even see that because we have all of the intellectual attainment that should cause us to be able to be superior and make these choices and make these decisions. And in the end, they ultimately become evident that they're foolish choices and that there are results from them, consequences that are very much undesirable. Zaid asked a question: do you think this certificate chasing is sustainable? Well, it's not going to allow us to be sustainable. Is it going to continue? Depends on the priority that we've got it out there and how much money we can support that activity. Because part of the challenge with certificates and degrees and things is there's a cost associated. At a minimum, there's always a time cost. And at that point, we lack the wisdom to consider, is this a wise choice of my time and investment? The other is the cost. Intellectual pursuits these days do have a cost factor attached. Getting education at the university level is quite expensive, and it's getting more expensive each day with everything going on. And even pursuing some of these certifications. I know that there are certifications out there that people are spending $5, $10, $15, $20,000 to get these certificates. And so again, this intellectual pursuit isn't cheap either. Whereas if we seek to be learners and we're seeking to grow in wisdom, there is plenty of knowledge, there's plenty of information and experiences where we can gain the wisdom and go beyond just getting the facts and figures and knowledge. And the great thing about that is, from a dollars and cents standpoint, it is much less costly. Now, even that, though, has a cost, because when we grow in wisdom and we make our mistakes, that we usually have some kind of cost factor. We know we have a cost factor from a time standpoint, but we have a cost factor from a financial standpoint and a relational standpoint. I think another byproduct of this lack of wisdom and the diminishing effort to become wise is affecting our relationships, both internal relationships, family and people close to us, as well as work relationships, other relationships outside of family. And our lack of wisdom, our lack of willingness to gain that wisdom, is a factor in what goes on. And the conflict that we see seemingly just mounting constantly is related to people not having the wisdom, one, to know how to avoid conflict that is unnecessary, and secondly, that there is conflict that's going to be there regardless of how to respond. We typically respond unwisely to those conflicts. Let's see. Jack has a comment. Our budding adults in the Z generation appear to be far more emotional when meeting adversity than the previous generations. Why is that? I find that the Z generation are on the surface more intelligent and process information much more quickly than many of the generations many of the generations before. Yet, if they are not given the inconvenience, they are quick to blame and overcorrect to a situation or circumstance. I tend to agree with your thought, Jack, that we have the Z generation, and they have had more intellectual pursuit as a whole than prior generations. And the problem is, and this is my contention, is that they have this intellectual basis, but that is all that they operate from. And without wisdom, it's easy to get intellect uh, mixed with overbearing emotion to a point that we make choices based on it, and they are unsound choices, unwise choices. And we are surprised when it happens because we think these people, these young people, have attained the education that is supposed to be the power, the ticket to the best life. But the problem is the education, the academic pursuit is not built with the idea of gaining the wisdom that needs to come along with what happens in life. And just the sheer fact that the younger generation tends to either react versus respond or overreact is an indication of the problem we're talking about. Because part of what happens with wisdom, as we gain wisdom, it causes us to be more responsive and less reactive, because we have gained the insight that comes with wisdom to know that quite often what we see initially or what we react or respond to is not all there is. And once we have been practiced at seeing things, remember, wisdom is taking our understanding, our knowledge, and seeing it in a much bigger, better context. And once we start that process, we begin to look at each of life's situations through that process, through the effort, and to gain wisdom rather than just to react and make a choice of some kind, and therefore quite often make unwise decisions, unwise choices in how we react. Welcome, Brian. Glad to have you with us, brother. I appreciate you being here and your great support. Let's see, we've got some more comments. Educating the mind without educating our heart is no education at all. There's a complete lack of wisdom. I agree, Dr. Vimla. And Dr. Vimla and I share a common priority in working with the International Institute of Influencers, and our vision as part of that is to humanize education. And that means taking education beyond just academic pursuit. And that's what Dr. Vimla is referring to in just educating the mind. Wisdom, another way maybe to look at it, is wisdom is educating all of our being, all of our person, learning and growing as a whole, not just as a mental pursuit. And so, yes, I believe that educating the mind without educating the heart, and I would even take it so far as to add educating the spirit, is causing what we see currently going on, that is feeding into the lack of wisdom that we are seeing in our world today. Thank you for that comment. Zaid says, do you think this is one of the causes of more toxicity in the work environment? I definitely think so, Zaid, because it's through gaining wisdom that we begin to understand how to better relate to each other. Without wisdom, if we base our relationship solely on an intellectual basis, with a almost a detached emotional part, we will react and respond in such a way that we don't consider beyond that moment. And we don't consider the consequences, the result of making a wise choice. And that is really what happens in toxic situations. People that are so caught up in their own status, their own position, their own outcomes, and taking care of number one, so to speak, which was a popular saying a few decades ago. When that's the way things are approached, then there is no reasonable way to approach those relationships in a healthy fashion. And so, yes, I believe that this lack of wisdom and lack of willingness to seek wisdom certainly contributes in a large way to toxic environments. Thanks for stopping in, Rosemary. I know that it's getting late there in Australia. Appreciate you hanging in there with us for a bit. And I hope you get some good rest. And we'll see you next time. So Brian makes comments to piggyback off Jack's thoughts on Gen Z. As I've told my soon-to-be 22-year-old son, the biggest fallacy I see is the lack of urgency in Gen Z. To use the wisdom of Kenny Rogers in The Gambler, you got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and know when to walk away, and know when to run. Yes, that is a part of the value of wisdom. And we can play play our hand, if you will, using the card analogy. We can play our hand based on odds and the statistics and all of those things, but without the wisdom to know that sense of urgency of how to make those decisions, then ultimately we end up in loss. And I would suggest not just loss, but conflict. And so we just really need to make it a priority to help to find wisdom and to seek wisdom. And some of that wisdom can be given and shared. That's the value of an older audience, and is to be able to gain wisdom from those that have been down the road ahead of us. And we can certainly benefit from that wisdom if we choose to. We don't always have to gain wisdom through struggle. But we cannot avoid struggle by trying to gain wisdom from other people. And anyone that's truly wise will tell you, I can share with you wisdom and give you insight into what's going on around us and so on. But I have gained enough wisdom to know that for me to try to short circuit the process of anyone gaining wisdom for themselves through the struggles of life, through dealing with adversity, I am becoming part of the problem. Because part of the contributing factor in all of this is the short circuiting of the process of growing and maturing. And part of the process of growing and maturing is to stumble and to fall, to struggle, to deal with pain, emotional, physical, mental, and learn how to walk through it and work through it. I believe that's why we also see so much hopelessness, is because we, again, no longer pursue wisdom and see things in the bigger picture. When we can see that bigger picture in our life, we're much less likely to get to a point of hopelessness because of that greater perspective, because of that greater understanding. One of the things I faced years ago is, in my working in construction, I had a situation where a friend of mine asked me to help him with a project. It was a stair project. And for those that know much about construction, you know that dealing with stairs is probably one of the more technically difficult things to do. Now, what bothered me about this was that I had never done that exact form of stairs. And so I did not have a plan that I could call on, and it was going to require coming up with the plan of its own. Plus, it involved parts that were unknown in regards to it, because before you know those things, you have to tear out the stairs, but then you have to be committed to moving through. And at first, I was very apprehensive because I did not have the answers. I had not done this before, but with time and processing through it, I realized that not only did I have the knowledge, technical knowledge, how to do stairs, but I had understanding and wisdom that I had gained to be able to take that knowledge base and then apply it in a way that is beyond the intellectual. It is was based in being able to reason and work through, and I knew that I could do that. And it was by working through that process, remembering and thinking from a wisdom standpoint, that I was able to go, okay, this is something we can do, and we'll be able to work through it. Even if we don't know everything there is to know, we can't be completely intellectual on it. And fortunately, we took on the project, and it turned out in the end to be really great. We were able to figure it out and get all the pieces and understanding, so that when we were done, it was a very pleasing end result. But along the way, we had to struggle. We had to consider dealing with unknown things. And it was gained wisdom that helped to get that perspective. By the way, gaining wisdom in one area feeds on other areas. And that's the value of seeking wisdom, is that as we gain more wisdom, then it feeds into getting even more wisdom. It's kind of like as computers have, excuse me, as computers is evolved. Originally, computer processors had to be designed manually using flowcharts and things. Once we got the first or second generation of computers, then the computers began to be able to generate these flowcharts. Excuse me. And that's why we see the hyper speed of growth in computers, is because now the learning that has occurred has gone beyond the original processes. So wisdom does that for us as well. Let's see. Thank you, Eunice. I appreciate that. Welcome. Welcome. Always good to see you. Excuse me. I'm very sorry. Allergy type things going on. So Brian has a comment. It says, I believe we're an overshare society, Kevin. There is wisdom in many cases in silence to the masses, and confiding in and seeking wisdom in few. My parents always says, don't tell everything you know. Not everything we go through in life should be shared with everyone in our lives. And yeah, we again, there is wisdom there. There are moments where we should share. and it's a very clear design that we all have, is to share from our life to benefit the lives of others. But to always be sharing and telling everything is indeed foolish, because there are people that are not prepared for what we have to share. And as a result, we create relational problems with those people, even in the effort to help someone else. So, yes, oversharing, or for that matter, just speaking too much. We have lost the value of being silent and keeping our thoughts. I know for me that's always been a struggle because of the way I'm wired and the way I process things. My tendency has, in the past, before maturing, has been to speak what's on my mind, whether it was wise to do so. Most times, what I had to say was truthful and accurate, but the way I went about it and the timing of it were unwise. And yet today, like you say, we overshare. If we think it, we think we've got to say it, and as a result, there are consequences that occur in and around our culture that create problems. So yes, I think oversharing is a part of the issue. Excuse me. And that's we see that partly because of the advent of social media. There was a time where we couldn't share what was going on in a large sense because there um, just wasn't the available audience to us, and so we just need to continue to seek and gain wisdom. The wisdom we gain helps to feed, to give us an opportunity to find more wisdom. And the result of not having wisdom, or seeking and gaining wisdom, is what a lot of what we're seeing in our culture today. As someone mentioned, I believe it might have been Jack, mentioned a lack of discernment, and that is prevalent in our culture. We intellectualize things and we can explain things away, but if we are wise and have gained discernment, even though we can intellectualize it, we deep down inside know something is not right, or it's unwise. And we have the ability, the practice, to be able to recognize that, and it's called discernment. We also lack insight into seeing the world around us outside of ourselves, so that we watch people making choices, and especially relational choices, that are damaging because they lack the wisdom to see beyond how it affects them only. And that's a real problem, because once we gain wisdom and begin to realize the choices of our words, the choices of our actions impact other people in different ways, and take the time to consider that, in other words, seeking the wisdom in those situations, then we end up with reactions. And when one person reacts to another, it is common that it leads to the second person reacting. And when that starts happening, we see the conflict. We see the toxicity that Zaid mentioned, that people are, rather than responding, rather than seeing things more wisely and considering them from wisdom, we have people reacting from their own intellectual basis, which may or may not have good foundation of character to go with it. And it will quickly escalate into a big problem. And that is another byproduct of not making wisdom a priority in our culture. And I really pray that we will begin to consider how can we reintroduce wisdom in our culture, and that and it's got to be based on us taking action. Remind you, we talked about good people doing nothing and the result. Well, this is another case of good people doing nothing, sharing wisdom, even speaking wisdom when it might not be popular. And as a result, we are watching a lack of wisdom in our culture. And the result continues to grow worse all the time. Let's see. And Zaid, if I missed a comment that that I should have seen, I apologize. I see you guys talking about it, and if you would put it back up if I'm missing it. Brian makes a comment. I love your construction analogy with the steps. People want to vent on social media. In our homes, vents spread the air through our homes. In the summer, we don't want vents to circulate heat through our homes, nor cold air in the winter. Vents circulate the air we choose through regulating temperature. Vent cool air in warm situations. Yes, I appreciate another analogy. I believe Anton likes to talk about rather than being thermometers, we need to be thermostats. And that based on the situation, the relationships, that we should not only be reading the temperature, but taking steps to adjust the temperature based on the situations we're in, and obviously and hopefully based in wisdom related to those circumstances. So thank you for that, Brian. I appreciate it. So we're running down the clock here. I hope that, first of all, that each of you will make it a priority to seek wisdom, to really seek it on not just a occasional basis, but on a daily basis. Seek out wisdom. And as you gain that wisdom, be willing to take a chance and be the person, the good person that does something good by sharing that wisdom, by suggesting that someone may be about to make a foolish choice because they lack wisdom, and being willing to take the wisdom that you have and share with them. Obviously, very important from a relational standpoint, anytime we're doing something like that, that it needs to be motivated in love, not selfishness, and not self-interest and what is in it for me. And otherwise, we create a whole nother set of challenges. So seek and gain wisdom, and be willing to be a conduit for wisdom to others. And as parents, if you're parents of young children, please make it a priority in your children's lives to help them find wisdom, not just intellectualize, not just read about something in a book and pick up that knowledge, but to really see how to apply wisdom based on the knowledge that they've received. And grandparents, I pray that you will make it a priority to help bring wisdom in the lives of your grandchildren. Such a valuable thing that we can do, rather than focusing all our energy on spoiling grandchildren. And again, I get the having the fun. I have 5 grandchildren and like to do some fun things, and them to have fun with me. They call me Pop, and really enjoy that. But please don't let it overshadow the opportunity for us as grandparents to build wisdom, help share wisdom, help guide towards wisdom in the life of our grandchildren. Well, thanks everyone for being here. So glad to be back. I really missed you guys the 2 weeks that we didn't have the podcast. And I look forward to being back with you next week. And let's see. Dr. Vimla makes a comment. If we see the things and process them from our soul before taking action, we will get the correct perception of those things through wisdom. Indeed, Dr. Vimla, wisdom has to be a part of our total being, including our spiritual being. And indeed, I agree. So have a great rest of your week. Seek and gain wisdom in it. And we will come back together next Monday morning for another episode of Wisdom Seeker Live podcast. God bless you all. Take care. Bye.